We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past, present, and emerging, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello, and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
We're your hosts, Rick Allport and Mackenzie Cross.
In each episode, we bring you meaningful conversations with vegan changemakers that remind us progress is possible, even in a world full of bad news.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Vegan Compass podcast. We're super excited to bring you a conversation today on a topic we haven't really dived into before. We're talking all about veganism, fashion, and consumption with Dr. Rachel Lamarche. So we're very excited to get into that. But before we do, how are you today, Rick?
Look, I'm really well. I'm actually really excited about this one because, of course, with my work with Kangaroos Alive, we are dealing with the whole kangaroo skin, kangaroo leather industry. So, yeah, having Dr. Rachel on with us is going to be absolutely fantastic. But before I ask our signature question, you have some news.
Yes, I've joined up to do the City to Surf this year, which if you're not in Sydney, you might not know, it's a 14-kilometre run. And I'm raising money for greyhound rescue. So very excited to be tackling this run. I've never run 14Ks before, so lots of training happening on my end. But if anyone in our community wants to support this event, there's a team of us running for Greyhound Rescue, Team Speed Noodles.
I love it.
I don't think I've earned the speed part. I'm just a noodle. But
So where do they go to, support the
fundraiser?
Fundraiser, that's it, yeah.
I'll put the link in the show notes.
Cool.
Thank you so much. Let's get into the episode.
Yes, indeed. And like I say, very excited about this one. So, Rachel, our first question is, of course, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Dr. Rachel Lamarche, and I'm a senior lecturer in fashion. And I'm also a founder of my own very, very small fashion brand.
Very exciting. So, how long have you been vegan, or, where are you based? A little bit more info like that for us.
So I'm based in Melbourne. Obviously from the accent, that's not where I grew up. So I grew up in Montreal, which is in the French part of Canada. Actually my vegan journey in some ways started when my mom went vegetarian herself when I was 6 years old. And my sister, who's 6 years older than me, then went vegetarian as well. And then she went vegan when she was a little bit older. And that really exposed me from a really early age to, the plight of animals. And unfortunately, it took me a long time to transition myself, but I went vegan when I was about 20, vegetarian when I was 18. So when I went vegan, for the fun story, I actually had just moved to New York to intern at Stella McCartney. So that makes a nice sense with, a nice link with fashion. And I was living by myself for the first time and had been wanting to go vegan for a while, like for a few months. And my sister wasn't living at home anymore. So, it still felt like it would have been an imposing change. But when I lived by myself, I decided, I'll give it a try. So I just decided to try vegan and then have been vegan ever since. So that means that I've been vegan for over 17 years now.
Wow, that's awesome. That is really cool. But yeah, it's a fascinating journey sort of coming through Montreal, and I guess living in Australia is quite different to living in Montreal. But so where did your interest in fashion start, and how did that change when you went vegan? Because I think you started fashion before you went vegan, is that correct?
As a teenager, I always loved fashion. I just loved everything about it, which obviously led to me becoming a fashion researcher. But I was a stylist for a little bit, or I interned as a stylist while I was in uni. But I was just loving everything that had to do with fashion. And then when I went, obviously, first vegetarian and then vegan, I was increasingly aware. And that's also why I went and worked at Stella McCartney. Like there's a clear connection. And we had to do an internship associated with my studies. And so when I had to select a brand to do an internship for, there was not really that many brands that were interesting to me, but Stella McCartney was like the brand. I loved that brand. And I wanted to do anything and everything I could to actually go and work there. And so back then, that's 17 years ago, I just tried to find any email I could find from the business and then emailed every single one of those email addresses saying, I'm a student studying fashion. I live in Montreal. I would love to intern for you. And it eventually worked out. I found my way doing an internship at Stella McCartney. And so they kind of continue to grow side by side. And really my approach to fashion and my veganism have been closely aligned, which is also why then I decided to do my PhD studying that topic.
Did you actually get to work alongside Stella McCartney, or were you kind of a few degrees of separation away?
I mean, a few times, not literally just me and her, but I was part of the team based in New York. So she is based in the UK. She's based in London. But she would come to New York for some of the kind of mid-season. So the big shows are in Paris. But, you know, I worked, I also went to Paris for some of the press for one of the shows and, you know, worked an after party. And when she came to New York for some of the events, I was present because I was also with PR. So, you know, we crossed paths, but I don't know that if she saw me, she would be like, oh my God, I know you. But, you know, it was a really great experience just in terms of learning about the fashion industry and also seeing someone who's doing it so consistently with their own values. Even though the brand itself is not a vegan brand, it's a vegetarian brand, it's still the only vegetarian brand operating at their level. So, you know, just from that lens, it was fantastic.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I'd love to know a little bit more about some statistics around the fashion industry and the use of animals. So I think most of us vegans are already quite aware of the scale of animals used in the food industry, but these animals that are used as raw materials or textiles often get overlooked. So what can you tell us there about the animals that are used in the fashion industry?
Yeah, it's actually quite dramatic how little people connect the animal agriculture industries with the fashion industries. It's almost like the meat industry and, you know, to a certain extent, the byproducts of the meat industry or of the animal agriculture industry, dairy, eggs, you know, there is a growing awareness surrounding them. I think that the vegan movement and the animal rights movement for many years has done a fantastic job in, you know, raising some kind of awareness around, you know, reconnecting these products to their origin. However, in fashion, the material has become so dissociated through so many different practices from its origin that it's actually very difficult for people to, I think, recognize the animal that's in the shoe or the bag or the item that they choose to buy. So the amount of animals that you need to actually make garments in terms of leather or even just to utilize in terms of the wool industry is really quite significant. And people don't realize things like, you know, for the silk industry, to make 1 kilogram of silk, you need 3,000 to 5,000 silkworms. So, and a lot of people don't realize even the process to make the fiber that is silk, and that, you know, silk cocoons are actually boiled with a live moth inside of the cocoon. So you can think about just the amount, the sheer quantity that you need to make the amount of silk that is utilized. And then silk is actually one of the lesser utilized fibers. So you can extrapolate that in regards to the amount of sheep being utilized for wool production, and the amount of not just cattle that is used for leather, but also their own offspring, because there's a lot of calf leather being used in industry, and there are practices that I don't necessarily want to mention that are really terrible. All of it is terrible, but confronting to an extent that you would never think these things could and would happen, yet they do. So in terms of statistics, in Poland, obviously the fur exports have collapsed, but there is still a lot of animals that are being used within the fur industry. Let me just get you those statistics. Over 10 million Australian lambs die yearly within a few days of their birth as part of the wool industry and of the animal agriculture sheep industry. And the reason for that is because of winter lambing. And when winter lambing is undertaken, the animals are unable to actually care for their young. A lot of the ewes that are impregnated are actually impregnated to carry twins or triplets, and because of that, they don't really have the capacity to care for them. And that's by design. They try to see if they can have as many as possible, just to make sure that some of them will survive. And so, just that practice in itself is really terrible. Australia is the largest supplier of wool still in the world. 318 million kilograms of wool was exported in the 2023-2024 season from Australia. So we do have, a significant, our wool industry is really quite significant. And then these are kind of the top materials, but then there's a massive industry of exotic, or quote unquote exotic, because I think that in itself is such an interesting and problematic term. Like, there is so much colonial history that's embedded in just a wording around exotic materials, let alone the conversation of wool as a colonial material, like that's an intrinsic link. But referring to certain animals as exotic and other as introduced and other as pests and other as native, like the language that we've crafted around animals is in itself so problematic and so human-centered. But yeah, the fashion industry's use of animal materials is unfortunately consistently growing, except for fur, where I think we're finally seeing a little bit of a decline, and ideally some bans coming into place, more bans. And that's a fight that it seems like it's been long enough that there's enough innovation within that space, and at the same time there's enough pushback that I think eventually we're going to continue to see that decline.
I went down I guess you call it the fashion hole this morning, because I came across a term I'd never known before, and that was slink leather. And I'm not going to talk about it, but if anybody wants to go and look into it, don't go look into it too deeply, because
just know it's confronting.
It's very disturbing. And again, you just think humans really have created hell on earth for what they do. But moving away from that, your PhD research looked at veganism and the fashion consumption. Now, I'm so impressed you've done a PhD, because I finished uni and just went, that's it, I'm out of here, never doing stuff again. But what made you decide to bring those two together? It's an interesting
combination.
That's the word I'm looking for. It's been a tough day.
Well, so it's a really, just me finding myself into a PhD program is an interesting story, because I started a PhD a little bit later on. I kind of took a break from my studies. So, I completely understand this. I went and worked for a little bit. But I really was lacking, I felt like I was lacking purpose. Like, I'd moved to Australia. I was in Australia already. I had established myself a life that worked. But something was missing. So in terms of, I guess in some way, professionalizing my veganism and making veganism central, not only to just my life as a person, but also my career. And I decided to do a PhD kind of through sheer luck, in the sense that I'd done a master's degree here, and had, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I'd done really well with that master's. And, one of the opportunities that came from it was, well, I've done so well, I could eventually do a PhD where I want to do this. And so I was really just compelled by the idea of potentially, what it would look like. And if I was going to do a PhD, it had to do something that I felt if you're doing a PhD, you need to choose something that you're passionate about, because you're going to have lots of late nights and many, many years of thinking about this. And so for me, I could have studied, a topic that relates to animal rights. However, I just felt in my core that would be very difficult to study for many years, and that would be a subject that, sitting within that subject, I would really struggle. And so I decided to study something that I knew was very limited research about, and yet I found really fascinating because I was part of the community, which was the link between veganism and fashion consumption. So I approached RMIT, which is where I did my PhD, RMIT University, with a project proposal, and quite quickly found, and this was in 2019, where, the vegan movement was also doing quite well. There was a vegan fashion week happening in the US. The vegan logos were growing in importance in terms of, so there was real momentum around, the discussion around, what did that mean, veganism and fashion together. And so because of that momentum, I think that created an opportunity, and I got into that PhD program. Obviously, I do not recommend doing a PhD during a pandemic. That was definitely quite difficult. But honestly, getting to the other side of the PhD, when it was done, the amount of gratefulness I felt, especially to my participants, because the subject allowed me to interview vegans, interview people who shared my values, so I could understand their thinking process, and gather and understand and analyze and try to explain and put into light, what happens in the vegan community, and in the lives of individual vegans, and the products that they own. So that's kind of how I came to it. But yeah, doing a PhD was a really wonderful opportunity that's led me here.
Amazing. Well, congratulations, because it is no easy feat to do a PhD, for sure.
Did you know that most of our listeners aren't subscribed yet?
If you're enjoying the conversation and believe these stories deserve to be heard, make sure you're subscribed.
It's a free and easy way to help us grow and keep these conversations going.
So your research specifically looked at an ethical dilemma that a lot of us face when we first transition to veganism, which is, what should we do with the existing animal products that we own? So what did your research reveal about how vegans are navigating this?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you specify, how vegans are navigating this, because that was never going to be the outcome to say this is what you should do, because it's such a personal process. But I guess it was formalizing the fact that, yes, this is actually a community-wide problem. As a community, the members of the vegan community who self-identify as vegan, which was an important part of my, when I was finding my participants, people needed to say, I'm vegan, and that they self-identified as a vegan themselves, and not, as plant-based, or because I really wanted to make sure that self-identification is actually quite important in terms of community belonging and also community portrayal. So what I found was that this is a real, true problem, and people really struggle with the process and how to actually either let go of those products. And there are so many interesting stories that came out of the data. And, I had people say, I gave them away, which a lot of people do. I had people say, I used the products until they weren't usable anymore. But I increasingly felt terrible about them, and didn't want to own them anymore. And then I had this one participant, and she would be receiving products as gifts, and she felt uncomfortable telling people that she didn't want to receive those products, and so but she didn't want to use them, and so she just held on to them in a part of her house, and she just didn't know what to do with these products. So they're really problematic in the life of their owners, and that's what the PhD demonstrated and the research demonstrated. But what the research demonstrated, which might be of interest to people listening right now, is how much more comfortable and aligned people felt when they had gotten rid of these products and they didn't wear them anymore. Like, those products were sites of internal conflict. And so once they were not in the homes and in the wardrobes of my research participants, they just felt so much better. And then for those who kept some of those products, if there was an emotional attachment to these products, another thing that happened is they often hid them. They hid them in a part of their house where they weren't out in the open, but they knew they were somewhere and they had an emotional resonance, but they weren't in their direct environment. It was just something that they were holding on to because they had additional emotional significance.
I know that I can understand that fully, because I've been in the rock music industry for many, many, many years, from a young boy. And of course, in the rock music industry, image, all those sorts of things, and I had the leather jacket. And the leather jacket went with me everywhere, to all the gigs, everywhere I went. I would wear this black leather jacket because it was part of the image. And then when I went vegan, I looked at this black leather jacket and I went, but I've got so many memories with this jacket. And I thought, how am I going to throw this away? And then I realized it's just a jacket. It's like the memories are still here. So why am I holding on to this thing that I'm so against that it just had to go? And as you said, there was a sense of relief when I said goodbye to it, because I've still got all those memories, but the jacket's no longer with me. Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what other of our listeners or people who watch, what their experiences have been, because I know it has conflicted so many people.
Yeah, you can leave comments on Spotify, on YouTube.
Yeah.
All of those places if you want to share your experiences.
Yeah, or even on Facebook when we post reels. We'd love to hear what people have done and how they've handled it. But from your research, so once somebody identifies as vegan, how does your psychology around future fashion purchases change?
One of the most important things that I found was that then either people actively replaced the products that, let's say, they had given away, or they were actively looking for vegan products. And some people also went beyond that and would purchase products that they might have not needed, but because they had a vegan label on them, they would then go ahead and feel like they were supporting the industry and supporting the use of a vegan label, even if maybe they didn't need the product. But it's a very interesting space because it's also fashion, contrary to food, can be there's so much related to identity, as you were mentioning. So how you want to portray yourself. And in what environments do you live, your career, your hobbies, your passion projects. And so, the processes that people went through to source and find products that were going to align with their identities, and finding, vegan versions or sometimes non-vegan versions, but versions that they felt ethically okay with. That was also very interesting. So the PhD in itself has many interesting findings. I actually love it looking back on it. Like, I think it's a good representation of the myriad ways vegans have to engage with a market that's not designed for them, and yet in some parts reflects it, right? Like, the market does reflect to us that we exist because we can find vegan products. So we're not alone. Those products exist out there because we are a large enough quantity that those products are made, but you just have to find them. So I would say that quite consistently people went ahead and then actively purchased vegan products after having gone through that transition of becoming vegan and then self-identifying as vegan.
It flows quite nicely into my next question. So, you published a definition of vegan fashion in a high ranking journal. So, why was it necessary to establish an academic definition for vegan fashion? What was missing from the mainstream understanding of it?
Another interesting and excellent question here. And, one that I think in some ways link very clearly with my work at Stella McCartney and when I worked at Stella McCartney and how that brand is actually a vegetarian brand. And my problem, or what I saw as the gap, was that whenever vegan fashion was utilized in academic work, sometimes it wasn't a correct definition, or it wasn't what I would have seen as, rejecting an all-encompassing list of materials. So they would say that Stella McCartney was a vegan brand. And to me, that was extremely problematic because I'm like, well, that's incorrect. And also, so many words within the fashion industry are what we call, or like they lack boundaries. So words like ethical, words like sustainable, those words are actually very difficult to define. They change depending on cultural context. They change depending on, what the local legislation says. They change depending on, even how a brand decides to communicate what that meaning has to them. However, veganism is actually quite clear. It's quite a simple definition. And so I thought, well, of all of the words that we use in fashion to talk about the different problematics or even the branding exercises, this one is easy and I can define it. It's easy because it excludes all animal materials and all derivatives that originate from the use of materials of animals as resources.
It's interesting that you actually just mentioned sustainable, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of vegans are challenged with, whether the materials that we're using now, how sustainable are they? So what are some of the biggest sustainability challenges that the fashion industry is facing?
Yeah, there's so many. The waste is a significant one. I say that this is probably one of the largest challenges. In the context of this podcast, one thing that I think is important to put forward, because a lot of vegans are probably faced with that debate when, speaking with family or friends who say that leather is a more sustainable material. I'd like to take this opportunity to debunk that. Because most leather, so about 85 to 90% of all leather that is available on the marketplace, which is literally millions of products, if not more, in order to become leather, the collagen, so the skin of the animal, has to be tanned. And as I was saying, 85 to 90% of that leather is chrome tanned using chromium, which is a forever chemical and a chemical that is very difficult to process. And so that also means that leather cannot be decomposed readily in, whether that's in regular compost. It's actually very difficult to manage at end of life. And so while it might have a quote unquote longer usable life, fashion in itself is quite disposable these days, and that can be a leather product as well as a non-leather product. So I just want to reiterate for your audiences that yes, tanned leather is not a natural material. It just isn't. And that has also been recognized by the leather industry. You can actually find a leather industry saying, we cannot say that this material is easily degradable because it's not true. So they've had to rectify how they speak about leather. So yeah, the fashion industry has overproduction problematics. But the really fun thing is that a lot of the fashion industry solutions are actually solutions which are inherently vegan or plant-based solutions. So while we have lots of problems, there are exciting innovations that we can invest in and that we'll ideally see in the future.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about bio-based materials. But just staying on the topic of sustainability for a minute, you were recently part of the Vogue Codes Summit, presenting on a panel about solutions and pathways to engage the fashion waste crisis. So what does it mean to see an institutional giant like Vogue giving a platform to this topic about fashion waste?
Yeah, I think that funnily enough, Vogue has actually been a really interesting media in terms of their engagement with vegan fashion, but also with all the problematics associated with the fashion industry. They were one of the first publications to actually have a conversation around sustainability. So while historically the editor-in-chief of Vogue for many years, Anna Wintour, had a terrible relationship with the animal rights movement and was a proponent of fur. The actual publication in itself, I think, has taken an active role in kind of acknowledging at least these problematics. And the topic of the panel, yes, I was very happy that there was this type of panel during Vogue Codes, but what it also highlighted is that there are so many interesting solutions in regards to the fashion waste crisis that most people are not aware of. But my participation was specifically to discuss the work that I'm trying to do with Les Plantes, which we mentioned at the beginning, which is a research and practice project, but I would also suggest, if anyone is listening who's very interested in the solutions surrounding waste in fashion, to look at Seamless Australia, who's the CEO of Seamless was one of the co-panelists on that fantastic panel. And the work of Seamless is so interesting, and they have so many case studies around how to manage waste locally here in Australia from a variety of industries like mining, textile waste, and how do you need to decontaminate that waste, and then for that, how do you then respin the fabric? Anyway, they're doing fantastic, super interesting work. So I think it's really important that major publications like Vogue that are able to provide these important platforms do talk about these problematics. That is who needs to put these types of conversations forward.
And you just mentioned your new brand, Le Plant. Congratulations on getting that launched and happening. But you are actively researching and developing high-end items like blazers, winter coats, designed to be completely manageable at end of life. Of course, end of life meaning when their life of the coat or whatever has finished, not the end of life of you. So can you tell us more about that? Because that's really interesting.
The process in itself has been kind of brewing in my mind for many years, and it was also kind of brought forward or continued to be brought forward through my research and through my PhD. So also realizing how people were struggling with, well, I don't want to utilize animal materials or materials of animal origin. And also I have a strong opposition to petroleum-derived components. So what do I do? And then I found myself in a similar situation. And I'm also quite well versed in textiles, obviously, just by interest and by, just by design of my job and what I teach and what I research. And so I realized that if I was to develop products that I wanted for myself, which originally I just started having my own products made for me, whether that was if I went on a holiday in Bali, I had a coat made once with all these materials that I just brought with me, found a tailor, because you can, it's a little bit cheaper, but they have fantastic tailors. And then I asked, can you make me a coat built on this with these materials? So I was already in this space where I was trying to conceive products that fit both sides of my brain, where I'm trying to diminish or minimize my use of petroleum-derived materials and obviously avoid all materials of animal origin. And so the idea kind of started from there. And then it grew into this idea of, well, we have a waste crisis. And how can I design a product that's not only vegan, but also, plant derived and easier to manage at end of life, which is when I started thinking about products which are completely devoid of both petroleum derived materials and materials of animal origin. However, that is very difficult to do. That is very difficult. And the reason for that is not the textiles. People would probably be surprised to hear that it is not the actual selection of the main shell or the fabric. That's somewhat easy to do. You can find 100% cotton or, viscose rayon, which I know is not the most sustainable material in itself, but, your lyocell's, your tencels, your cupramonium, which, I know I'm getting a little bit advanced here in terms of my fabrics, but you can find really fantastic fabrics that are themselves cellulose derived. The real difficulty is in the hidden architecture of garments. So, while you have a t-shirt and both of you are wearing, you're wearing a sweater, you're wearing a t-shirt, even if those are 100% cotton, it is very likely that they've also been assembled with polyester thread. So the polyester thread would actually hinder a lot of that end of life kind of biodegradation effort were they to be put into the ground. Now, for a blazer, there is even more hidden architecture. There are the shoulder pads, which might be wool or polyester or a blend of both. You have a fusing that is made and imposed on the fabric in order to keep that fabric stiff. So often that's going to be a polyester or a material that has glue and it's got a wool. Like, it can be made in a variety of ways, but it's actually quite difficult to find one that is made to biodegrade. Then you have the buttons. If you have pants, you have the elastic, you have the tape on the zipper. Like, there are all these elements. And so that's why I keep talking about this as research and practice and a micro brand, because I'm having to also source all these interesting materials and bring them together and find makers who are compelled by the project and willing to help me in making these products happen. But just sourcing the correct thread that is not polyester, that works on an industrial machine, was quite a challenge. So and we got there. We're able to now make all of these products without petroleum derived materials nor materials of animal origin. So it's really fantastic to have gotten there.
Very exciting. As someone who knows nothing about fashion, like, I had no idea how much work and thought had to go into all of it. So yeah, that's cool.
You know nothing about fashion. Holy crap. Yeah.
So one of your big achievements is Les Plantes debuted at Melbourne Fashion Week. So what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was so much fun. And I was so proud, to be honest, like, just to be able to be part of a runway. But what's really important to mention is that it wasn't any runway. It was a runway that was also celebrating local makers, because I make in Australia with local makers and pattern makers that are local. And so in itself, just being able to be part of a show with all these great creatives who also value not only, the art of fashion, but also value making locally, was really fantastic. Like, I was so proud to be able to be part of that show as a local maker, and literally as the only person who had, a product that was proudly vegan by design. So I think I was probably also one of the only brands in the whole of Melbourne Fashion Week that was able to mention that as part of, what their brand stood for. So I was really excited. And also, Melbourne is it's my home. I love the city. And just the fact to be myself able to be in Melbourne Fashion Week was also really like a dream come true, really.
Well, Melbourne is kind of, look, I would say the cultural capital of Australia in the form of music and art. And all things obviously now fashion as well. So you've landed in a really good place to be. But so you're currently, you mentioned this before about biomass. See, I tell you, it's a bad day. Bio-based materials. So that is your current research, and how it's being used in the market. So firstly, can you explain to us what bio-based materials are and how can they help replace animal counterparts?
Part of my research, so I'm investigating at the moment as part of a larger portfolio of research, what has happened in the space of alternatives to leather and like innovative alternatives to leather and how they have been applied in the market historically, especially over the past, I'd say 8 years. And a lot of them were used as really kind of marketing exercises, as kind of capsule collections or flash in the pan collaborations with some luxury brands. And then they don't have any long-lasting impact. And I think one of the things that I'm finding through this research is the fact that is from a heritage perspective, trying to get in with the luxury brands might not be the best move forward because it keeps innovative alternative materials as something that's potentially out of reach. And that the person who's buying from a luxury brand in some way has the heritage of that brand in mind. And the heritage of many luxury brands is built on the use of materials of animal origin. And with that in mind, one of the things that I personally am pushing forward is ideally that eventually we will see a mass market retailer actually embrace these materials and long-lasting contracts in order for the masses to actually come into contact with these types of products so that there's no more barriers. And the expectations are actually quite similar if you're looking for a leather alternative that is not bio-based or that is not derived from an interesting cellulose, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think that in some ways that would have a much better and a much wider impact in the market if you could get as many people as possible to actually try on these products and see their durability. Now, bio-based materials have, you can think about them as some bio-based materials are fully degradable. So like the best case scenario here was a material called Mirum. Now, the maker of Mirum is focusing at the moment natural fiber welding. They're focusing on only one element of the business, which unfortunately is not Mirum. However, within the space of material alternatives, we've seen so many interesting developments over the last few years. We've seen Desertor, which was a cactus-based leather. And when we hear things like this, what's most important to think about is that it's the pulp, it's the cellulose, it's not the actual cactus that's tanned, it's whatever it's made of that can then be utilized and turned into a material. So the same has been true with grape. Grape leather was a thing. Apple leather, Mimco used apple leather. Oraton did an apple leather collaboration. They did only one small collection. There's mushroom leather. For a while, there was pineapple leather. Unfortunately, that's also folded. There's olive leather, which is slowly is kind of becoming another interesting entrant in the market. So there's so many alternatives being developed. And what's really interesting is that every time a new alternative is developed, they try to design out some of the petroleum-derived material. So not only are they already lower in impact than anything that's derived from animal agriculture, but all kind of iteration, all new material develops and builds on the previous one, which means that those types of materials, which are into themselves mostly plant-derived, will eventually lead to a space where we're able to create these products that are actually straightforward to manage at end of life as well.
Yeah, very interesting. And obviously, this sort of flows more into your work now as a lecturer and how you're seeing, the future of fashion changing and up and coming fashion students. So from your current observations as a lecturer, how do you see the conversation around animal-derived textiles changing amongst your students?
Yeah, so I would actually like to study this even more. I would really like to do a larger research project where I can speak to both lecturers and students in regard to how they approach these types of conversations, and also their understanding and how their cultural upbringing might have also had an impact on how they see these materials. And I actually have a book chapter coming out a little bit later this year that is specifically in a book that's about scholarship, and how, as a lecturer myself in Australia, no one has told me to do this, but I have felt like I've had to self-censure. And there are things that I've actively decided to reframe or say in a way that obviously we should always be open and we should always be transparent, but also never aim to hurt anybody when we talk about these issues that are important to the animals and important to us as people. We are the best advocates after the animals themselves. But I have felt in Australia, because of the colonial history and the importance of wool, that I've never always felt completely free to discuss, the realities of wool. But that's something that's definitely changing over the years. Like I'm taking a more active approach to, telling kind of a comprehensive truth that doesn't hide from the realities of the industry. I think that students and the generation that I'm teaching right now, we don't give them enough credit for their openness. That doesn't mean that they'll agree, but they're open to absorbing that information. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of that generation grew up in a space where, you're kind of digesting information really quickly. Like you have to, and you're being fed a lot of information really fast. So I think when you have to engage with a debate, that takes longer, and that you really have to think through in a lot of ways. When you explain things and you give them an opportunity to ask question in a space that's open, a lot of them will actually openly want to discuss it, or will will put forward alternative to materials of animal origin within their papers, or within a range plan, or they are very aware when you make sure that that they can engage with the topic. But it's like everything else, everyone, and let alone students in all universities, if we were to ask them if they're aware of the implications associated with animals within their field of studies, they probably don't think about it that much. So it's the role of educators to find a way to actually bring those topics forward in a way that will resonate with students, and that's not going to put them in a defensive place.
So based on what you're doing with talking with students and teaching them and showing them all the different ways they can be using fashion and the materials that they can be using, do you have hope for the future that a broader fashion industry can be ethical for animals, people, and the planet?
Oh, that is such a difficult question. I think so, but I also there are so many cultural imperatives that have kept us in a space where fashion is so disposable. And because of that, there's so many other changes to happen in regards to how we engage, not just with animals, but with our environments. Being aware around waste colonialism, like exporting our waste to other countries, and conversations around textile recycling, and things as simple as sorting. So I am hopeful that that as humanity continues to face the crisis that it faces in terms of the climate, that we will find solutions to some of those problematics. But yeah, it can be a difficult place to be optimistic, but that's all you can be, because if you're not optimistic, then you can't see the joy in, changing a person's mind, or being able to even just opening a debate about this type of topic, an open, respectful debate with students and with faculty, with your other researchers and the other people within your space. So I see myself as I'm one of the few vegans within this space. And as an educator, I try to really do my best to be the best voice that I can be for animals. And that keeps me hopeful.
You're doing an amazing job.
Well, look, I think I'm doing really well, because I'm one of these people who will buy a T-shirt and keep wearing it and keep wearing it and keep wearing it, and it will have holes in it, and I'll keep wearing it. I will wear it till its end of life has probably happened 10 years beforehand. So I think I'm, sort of okay, but I go in and out of fashion. So, I'll buy it when it's in fashion. I'll go out of fashion for 7 years, and then suddenly I'm in fashion again. So,
then it's back again.
Yeah.
That's how trends work. You've cracked the code, I think.
That's so funny. For my 18th birthday, I got pineapple leather Doc Martens, and my grandma was like, I can't believe Doc Martens are back in fashion. I think they're out again, but I still wear them.
Well, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier in this conversation about, buying something extra because you go, yes, I'm supporting the vegan brand. I have 2 vegan wallets. I alternate them. I was given one by the fabulous people from the what is it? The leather company, the vegan leather company. Yeah. So my beautiful friends there gave me this wonderful vegan wallet, and then I got another vegan wallet, and I felt torn. So I used them both, and I probably had them now for, again, 10 years or something. They're both still great, all vegan leather. So yeah, it's very cool. But yes, I had that dilemma about, having too many things at one time.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm guilty as charged as well. Like, as in, for me, there's a real interest in even being able to compare materials. And, I'm not, my own experience is not replicated as the experience of others. But I've done really well with my material alternatives. So when Oroton came out with their apple leather collection, I was like, I'm going to buy a computer bag from that collection. And I went into the store and no one knew that they had an apple leather. So we had to go through all of their computer bags to find the one that had a label that said apple leather. I'm a proud supporter of a local Melbourne brand called Sans Beast. And, they have some fantastic products. Catherine, the founder, is always experimenting with novel materials. And so, always using her as a case study, as an example. She had some Miram products made. I love them. They're great. They have so much durability. I've bought an apple, not an apple leather, a grape leather bag once. Like, for me, obviously, there's a researcher element to it, but I'm also realizing that those materials are actually very durable, and so there's so much disinformation around quote unquote vegan leather, and there's been so much demonization because the leather industry has been like, you cannot call this leather, the same as they would have, with you cannot call this butter and you cannot call this milk. And so these material alternatives, people say they're not durable, but I've repaired a pair of Miram shoes 4 times, and it's not the material. It's just that I'm a stumper. Like, I walk with purpose. I have a vegan message to deliver. But yeah, all that to say that they've been super easy to have repaired with vegan materials. So I do it to support, but also to show that you can actually use these materials and you're not constantly replacing them. That's incorrect.
Well, I think it's always interesting, though. We, Mackenzie and I were doing the NARD protest or outreach event just recently. Then we went on to Andy Faulkner's animal funeral event, and we're all standing around in the formation, and there was a lady standing next to Mackenzie, and this bloke walks up to her and he goes, leather shoes. And she just said, they're vegan leather. He just turned around and went, oh, yeah, vegan leather, my ass. And it's like, they just don't understand that there's vegan leather. Then they refuse to accept that that's the new norm, you know?
It happens at nearly every animal protest that I've been to, and I've worn my vegan docs. Everyone's like, they're leather. I'm like, they're not. They're pineapple leather.
Here, take a bite.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting space, and that's something that came out in my thesis as well. Like, there was an element of because I did interview some activists, and some activists were also wearing, their vegan products to protests, experimenting exactly what you just discussed. People coming up to them saying, these are obviously not vegan. Someone working in a grocery store and had steel cap boots that were vegan. And someone were like, what about your boots? And no, they're vegan. So it's almost like there's a micro education piece that every time that someone points to a vegan, and he's just like, you're on your high horse, it's almost like taking apart the message that's being brought forward. And I think that was an important part too. Like, it's important how we display ourselves and how we express our identity through the products that we wear. And the title of my thesis is actually, I feel complete when I'm wearing my vegan boots, because that's what someone told me during an interview, is that they felt complete when everything they wore was vegan, and that's how they presented themselves to the world, because they felt the most authentically aligned. And I feel that that's probably what happens when you also go out and you do your activism and you are dressed in a way that you're like, all of this also supports my movement and my message.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a nice way to round out the conversation.
I think it's been fascinating. And yeah, like I said right at the start, it's something that I've been interested in, but it's something, for some reason, we just had never got around to doing a fashion episode. So I'm really glad that you came along. Just quickly, what would be just like 2 key pieces of advice that you could give to our listeners about living in a more sustainable, animal-friendly, ethical world?
Specifically in the fashion space, I would say to avoid trends and buy authentically products that are eco-friendly or have a vegan certification, but also that you're going to keep for a long time. Disposability is a big problem, and it's going to also make you feel like you are actually part of the waste crisis if you're constantly buying new products. And I will say from myself and for your listeners, to actually investigate how you feel about what you already have, to think like, are the products that I put on my body, do they actually communicate how I truly feel about the world that I live in, and the message that I want to be able to put forward when people have a conversation with me about my veganism. Am I able to stand firmly and say, I'm actually the living proof that you can and be happy, stylish, and completely self-embodied, wearing the products that I'm actually proud to wear. So I think that's important, and we can't, as vegans, we sometimes are made to feel like we have to be small, because our opinions go against the grain. But I think people should stand proud, because they are part of the solution.
That is a fabulous message to bring us to the end of this podcast episode. I can't thank you enough for being here, and your knowledge is really amazing. And I really hope everybody gets stuff out of this episode. Like I've just got a heap out of this episode.
Yeah.
And I never even knew you had pineapple Doc Martens. So
I'll
you learn
show you.
something every day.
There we go. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to have a chat with y'all.
Yeah, absolutely our pleasure. So, folks, this brings us to the end of another wonderful episode of the Vegan Compass podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and do all those things. Share with your friends, please. And we look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
Bye. Thank you so much, Rachel.
No worries. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please let us know by leaving a comment and share this episode with a friend.